Hello and welcome to this episode of Fantasy Baseball Picks and Bets. I am Garion Thorne, and we are presented by Prize Picks. As you guys know, head over to prizepicks.com and use the promo code MMNMLB to get a match deposit bonus of up to $100 on your first deposit. So you're going to want to make sure to go do that if you're interested in playing some fun DFS games during the MLB season. What you also have to do, we've got a list here of things you can do to help out the show. Head over and not only subscribe to the audio version of this podcast, but leave us a 5-star review, say something nice in the comment section, and leave your DK handle or leave an email or leave a Twitter handle. Leave some way we can possibly contact you because you will be put into a draw for $100, just $100. It's the Mayo special here on the Fantasy Baseball Picks and Bet Show. Also, make sure to like this video and leave a comment down below talking about who your favorite pitcher for the 2021 MLB season is. The one guy going into drafts who you know you do not want to miss on. And maybe the perception of that player changes because we are talking rankings on today's episode of the show. And to do that, we have Derek VanRiper of The Athletic, also the co-host of the Rates and Barrels podcast, one of the best fantasy baseball podcasts on the planet. Derek, thank you so much for taking the time, man.
Thanks for having me on, Garion.
No worries at all. It is my pleasure. People say that, but this really is my pleasure. We're getting close. We are about 2 weeks away from the start of the fantasy baseball season. Draft season is kicking into high gear, so we thought we would run through some rankings. We're going to do positional rankings on another show, focus on starting pitching today. And I think the top of the board for starting pitchers, I don't want to say it's chalk, but I think everyone's got the same three guys. And whatever order you want to put them in, that's fine. But number 4 is where it kind of gets interesting. So let's look at your top 10 right now. You got Jacob deGrom right off the hop, Garrett Cole at 2, Shane Bieber at 3. Walker Buehler at 4, Lucas Giolito at 5, Yu Darvish at 6, Brandon Woodruff at 7, Jack Flaherty at 8, Max Scherzer at 9, and rounding out your top 10 is Trevor Bauer. So let's talk about those Dodgers guys because there's so much narrative surrounding these two gentlemen, one more than the other, and he kind of brings that upon himself. But let's focus on Buehler for right now because he's on your rankings kind of where Trevor Bauer is being drafted regularly. And you know, there's obviously a lot of talent between these two guys. With someone like Buehler, he's coming off not just a weird 2020 campaign for all the reasons that everyone had a weird 2020 campaign, but he had some injuries mixed in as well. But someone who's got pedigree, someone who has massive amounts of talent. How did you go about separating these two starting pitchers?
Yeah, it's weird because if you're just looking at the shortened season, Bauer over Buehler makes all the sense in the world, and that's what the market does. For me, the difference comes in the walk rate. Walker Buehler's had a walk rate under 6% when you take the 2019 and 2020 seasons and just mush them together. Bauer's flaw has always been walks and also home runs. Like the home run rate's legitimately kind of bad for an ace with Trevor Bauer. We're picking nits. These are two really good guys who are now on the same team, so they both benefit from the same run support, the same bullpen protecting their leads. But I look at Buehler, I think the other advantage is also stuff. Fastball has more life on it. I think there's still a possibility that we get a good 4-pitch mix from him this season as well. I just trust him to be better start to start. If you look at from 2018 to 2020, at the time that Walker Buehler's been in the league, he's posted better ERA and better whip than Trevor Bauer during that exact same span. That includes Bauer's amazing 2020. So for me, it's, you know, there's not that much of a difference between them, but I'm actually going with the younger guy who I still think has one more level to unlock, the guy who I think is more likely to be firmly in the first round with his ADP in NFBC drafts this time next year.
When it comes to Bauer, I think it's such an interesting conversation because there's so many different directions you can take it. I know Rob Silver loves talking about how Trevor Bauer's just not been that good aside from a season and a half, and you have to cherry pick that season and a half because, as you mentioned, you go back to the start of 2019, you look at any expected statistic you want, any advanced metric, Buehler is the better pitcher, or he projects to be the better pitcher. Yet we're still talking about someone who last season was 99th percentile expected ERA and 95th percentile strikeout rate. I know there's stuff with, you know, substances on the baseballs. I know we're talking about the schedule against the AL Central and the NL Central. There's so many reasons and so many ways you can kind of knock Trevor Bauer's 2020 season. Is it with the Dodgers? Is there something to be said just that we know Bauer is going to be taking the mound every single fifth day? Because sometimes with guys, I mean, we'll talk about this with Urias a little bit later, but and I think Buehler is probably at an echelon where you're going to put him in for his starts if he's able to start. But Dave Roberts has this reputation, and the Dodgers organization has this reputation of really babying their big time pitching prospects. And they've got so much depth. Is there something to be said that Bauer's probably just going to be the one of these two guys who definitely pitches 200 innings?
I think that's the absolute best skill Trevor Bauer has is durability, and the innings are a concern for everybody this year. Everybody thinks that teams are going to manage pitching staffs differently coming off the shortened season. I'm not sure it's entirely true. I do think younger starters who never built up to 180 plus innings in a season before, they might be handled with an extra amount of care. But for veteran guys especially, I think they've been through this. They know how to go through an offseason. They know how to prepare. They know how to ramp up. I'm not as worried about the workloads for those established guys. We're talking Darvish and Scherzer and some of the other guys that are inside the top 10. Obviously, DeGrom, Cole, Bieber, they're all great as well. I think the durability factor with Bauer does hold his value at a really steady level for me. Like the inconsistency that Rob Silver mentioned, that's my fear as well. 5 times we've seen Trevor Bauer put up an ERA above 4, and he was always pushing the envelope. He was always trying. He was always tinkering. He was always doing all these things. You did mention the sticky substances, the pine tar increasing the spin rate on the fastball. That's real. He's going to keep doing that. There's no reason for him not to do that. But there's going to be some correction. I think that schedule from last year, being in the Central Divisions especially, gave him a few extra soft landing spots. He's a good pitcher. I just don't think he's an elite pitcher. And we've seen enough of him that I think it's fair to say he still has to prove that despite the excellence in 2020.
Well, here comes one of our fantasy baseball picks and bets, seamless transitions. We talk about workload. Brandon Woodruff, Mr. Workload, when we're talking about high-end starting pitchers for the 2021 season. The only knock on Woodruff is we have not seen him handle a workload of anything close to 200 innings. I'd love to see him work 150 innings. I think a lot of people could get on that same track. But if you're taking him as your 7th overall pitcher, you need him up around 180, 190. And, even if you want to go back to the start of 2019, there were 60 pitchers who have thrown 200 innings in that span of time. Woodruff's at 195, but I'm going to put him in this group. But for anyone who's kind of like, Brandon Woodruff, really, the numbers are elite. The efficiency is elite. I mean, in that span of time, 6th in FIP, 10th in XFIP, 9th in strikeout rate, hovering right around 30%. It's just a matter of the innings volatility. So I'm sure you know how this could go wrong, but why could it go so right?
Well, with Woodruff, he holds velocity deep into his starts. The curveball's coming along, so the arsenal's getting deeper. And I think the Brewers are one of those teams that do manage a lot of their starters very carefully. They don't let all their starters get through the lineup a third time, but Woodruff is one of their exceptions. He is clearly their ace. If it weren't for an oblique injury that he suffered in the second half of 2019, the innings total from the last 2 seasons would be in line with the other starters that we're talking about inside the top 10. It'd be closer to what Lucas Giolito and Yu Darvish have done. Maybe a tick behind DeGrom and Cole, but not everyone can beat DeGrom and Cole and Bieber with workloads. So I think he makes sense just based on the fact that it was an oblique injury. It wasn't a shoulder. It wasn't an elbow. It wasn't the kind of injury we're worried about in the long run, causing him further issues. The other big difference for me with Woodruff compared to some other guys I have in the back of the top 10, the great walk rate, right around 6%, but also home run suppression appears to be a legitimate skill of his if you look at the longer track record, which is really impressive, pitching half his games in Miller Park especially. I mean, that's a place where the ball flies all season long. So I think he has everything you're looking for in an ace except durability. I think we're at the point in his career where he can kind of consolidate everything and actually come close to 200 innings this year. Gary, and I'm not sure about you. How many people do you think are going to get to 200 innings this year? Someone put the over-under at 3.5 for me. And I said, I will reluctantly take the over on 3.5, but I think that's about where that number belongs.
Yeah, I will admit, I went back yesterday and just out of pure curiosity was trying to remind myself in a normal year how many pitchers get to 200 innings. And in 2019, I believe 16 guys threw 200 innings. Yeah, 5, 6. That's probably the number we're looking at this year. So you're right, maybe taking a chance on some of these guys who, if innings are the knock, this might be the year to really steer into that curve. And it's interesting because, I don't mean to keep pairing up pitchers just because they pitch on the same team, but wanted to get your quick thought on Corbin Burnes because he's such a similar archetype to Woodruff. And it's not like you're alone in this. Right now, their NFBC ADP is about 30 picks apart. People are, very concrete in their belief that Woodruff is the better pitcher for the 2021 season, even though Burnes had much better ratios and much better efficiency in 2020. How do you go about separating those two guys? You have Burnes at 23 and again, Woodruff at 7.
The big thing for me is the walk rate, 10% walk rate from Corbin Burnes, even in the shortened season when things were going really well. That's still a concern. And the command plus number I look at backs that up. Fortunately, we have a metric that measures command better than what we had in the past. You look at that and you say, okay, he's well below average in command. He's above average in walk rate. That kind of walks in lockstep. And I think that home run suppression that I was talking about with Woodruff being a verified skill, I'm less convinced that Corbin Burnes owns that coming off of the shortened season, especially given the issues he had early in 2019 before he got bumped from the rotation. I mean, the contrast between 19 and 20 for Corbin Burnes is probably as wide as it is for any player in the entire pool. He was miserable in 2019 and he was fantastic in 2020. I see kind of a high threes ERA guy who's going to be a little bit bumpy in the whip category and he's going to get you plenty of strikeouts. For me, that's firmly someone that belongs inside the top 25 among starting pitchers, but definitely not someone who's proven that he belongs inside the top 10 just yet.
Well, we did cheat and we hopped over to your number 23 pitcher. Let's get into the teens now. Luis Castillo comes in at number 11, Clayton Kershaw at 12, Aaron Nola 13, Tyler Glasnow at 14, his former teammate Blake Snell at 15, Zach Gallen at 16, Steven Strasburg at 17, Kenta Maeda at 18, Sonny Gray at 19, and Jose Berrios at 20. Let's talk about Tyler Glasnow. I am excited to talk about Tyler Glasnow. I don't want to say you're super high on Glasnow, but just to give people some perspective, he's your SP14. Right now in NFBC formats, he's going about SP17, SP18. So again, not a huge differentiation, but you like the guy. And I think there's really good reason to like Glasnow. And a lot of people will say the home run to fly ball ratio was terrible. The home run to 9 numbers last season were really bad. He did struggle in the playoffs a little bit when a lot of eyes were on him, but the strikeout rate, whenever you're starting a conversation with a 38.2% strikeout rate, it's a pretty good place to start. Anything beyond that, kind of just white noise. Also, there's a particular archetype of pitcher that's kind of emerged the last half decade. And I think there's a lot of guys who fall into this bucket. We've got obviously Justin Verlander, Garrett Cole's had a little bit of this, but the name I keep coming back to when I look at someone who has, when you look at their advanced metrics, when you look at the StatCast numbers and say, this guy gets hit really hard and he gets barreled up a lot when people actually make contact. Doesn't that just sound like 2019 Shane Bieber? I mean, is there a version of Tyler Glasnow where he's just Shane Bieber?
It's possible. I think the hardest thing to imagine from Tyler Glasnow is the volume of innings we've been getting from Bieber. I mean,
Right.
Arm injuries have been a problem for him. I think skills-wise, he can be that kind of pitcher. I think he can make the leap. He can be a top 5 starting pitcher. That is in Tyler Glasnow's range of outcomes. And I've been wondering if we've been making too much of how the Rays managed him in the playoffs when every single out matters a lot more in the playoffs. You're going to err on the side of taking a guy out of the game a little early as opposed to leaving him in too long. Clearly, the Rays had that philosophy throughout the postseason last year.
Yeah, I think people made some noise about that.
Yeah, people were talking about that a little bit. But if you look at the end of the regular season from late August on, and you go back to 2019 before Glasnow's injury, they used him like a regular starter. He pitched 5 or more innings in every start. I think his last 7 times out in 2020 in the regular season, and his first 8 times out before the injury in 2019. So they want him to go 6 and 7 innings as long as he holds up physically. For him, the development of a third pitch is really important, right? It's fastball, curveball mostly right now. If the changeup clicks, he's going to be even more dangerous against lefties. So the difference for me between Glasnow and Burnes is that we've seen good Glasnow a little more than we've seen good Corbin Burnes, but they're actually very similar because they both have that same flaw where the command is that last thing to come around. And at a certain point, if you're nasty enough, the command doesn't matter because you're still getting guys to chase pitches they shouldn't even be swinging at. And you're just piling up Ks at such an alarmingly high rate that it offsets the possibility of having a slightly elevated whip.
Let's talk about Jose Berrios next. And it was almost unintentional, but as we've been talking so far this show, it's almost not proving my point because I don't have a point to prove necessarily. But I would say when I think about Jose Berrios, I don't, underwhelmed is the wrong word. I'm just sort of like, yeah, all right, cool. He's Jose Berrios. He's fine. But we're talking about Brandon Woodruff and Burns and Glasnow and 35% strikeout rates and yada yada. And he just doesn't have that. He's just rock solid. And I do think sometimes we forget that rock solid is a skill set, especially, to dovetail this. He could definitely be one of the 5 guys who throws 200 innings this year. That would very much be in his range of outcomes. And you go back to the start of 2018, that volume just, it adds up. That's what it does. He's top 15 in innings. He's top 15 in wins. He's top 15 in strikeouts. And it doesn't seem like he would be that guy, but if you're just out there every 5th day, you're going to bring back value. So you've got him right at number 20. He's going towards the back end of the top 30 in NFBC drafts, because I do think a lot of people like me get a little lazy and just go, I want the sexy new thing. I want something more exciting. Is that the value with Berrios, or do you still think there's another step he can take?
I think another step is possible, but I do think people underestimate the value of a workload. 263 and a third innings over the last 2 seasons combined, that definitely pops. And I think once you get outside the top 15 or so, you're starting to look for safe workloads. And Berrios has that. I think Lance Lynn has it. Hyunjin Ryu has that. Not surprisingly, all 3 of those guys are clustered together on my rankings. But part of the reason I think there could be one more level from Jose Berrios, we saw an uptick in velocity last season, about 1.5 miles per hour up on the 4-seamer, almost 2 miles per hour up on the sinker, has the curveball and the changeup. So he's a legitimate 4-pitch guy, and he's mixing those pitches the way kind of like Hyunjin Ryu does, where you don't really know what you're going to get in any count. A lot of this is faith in the Twins as an organization that has become really good at developing pitching and really maximizing some of the values they've had on that staff ever since Wes Johnson came on board as a pitching coach. They've had a few guys take the leap. And Berrios, I think we forget this because he's been around for a while. He's still only 26 years old. So it's still possible that it all comes together and we do get one more level in terms of K rate. But he doesn't necessarily have to do that to return value where he's going, especially if you're getting him at ADP. I've got him a little above ADP, like you mentioned. So there's kind of a little bit of a game of chicken in terms of waiting until just the right time to get him. But I see him as a really solid SP2 and a guy that actually pairs really well. If you're going to build around Tyler Glasnow and maybe wait to get your first pitcher a little bit, Berrios gets you some of the innings that you need and that you're missing out on by passing on some of those elite of the elite starters.
I do think that's an interesting point, though, that you brought up towards the end of that when it comes to draft strategy with someone like Berrios. If you're drafting at the turn, let's say you've got maybe not necessarily like pick 12 and pick 13, but even like pick 11 and pick 14, and you're getting towards round 5, round 6 of the draft, is he someone you're hunting down in the corners like, I need to get this guy? Or is he more of a, oh, wow, he's fallen to this point, this is a gift now when it comes to Berrios?
Probably a little more of a faller than a guy that I'm actually seeking out. I think I'm looking for somebody, if I'm going to push someone on ADP, I'm looking for someone that the room generally likes. And I think if I'm ranking a player above ADP, I'm letting him fall to me. But if I'm ranking a player below ADP, and I think that player is actually, worth grabbing there because the market tends to get him before I like to take him. Like maybe it's the last source of steals, or maybe it's an elite closer or whatever it might be. I'm going to push that player up in that case because I know the room is much more likely to take that player before my next picks come up.
Well, let's get to your 21 through 30 rankings to close this thing out. Lance Lynn comes in at 21, Hyunjin Ryu 22, Corbin Burns, the aforementioned Corbin Burns 23, Zach Plesac 24, Julio Urias 25, Jesus Luzardo 26, Chris Paddock 27, Max Fried 28, Carlos Carrasco 29, and Zach Greinke rounds out the top 30. Urias is just such an interesting case. Not often do I have to do like a spit take, especially when I'm by myself. It's kind of weird when you get yourself to do a spit take, but opened up his Fangraphs page yesterday and was like, is this year 6 of Julio Urias? Like, I know it's been a weird, like, kind of smashed together, not always present at the major league level 6 years, but this guy pitched in 2015 at the major league level. I mean, it's kind of crazy because we still talk about him like the untapped potential. And don't get me wrong, there's obvious untapped potential here, but what sort of expectations do you have for Urias this season? Because again, this is obviously someone you've ranked above ADP. Is it just this is the year he throws 175 innings and we finally see what the hype's been about for this past half decade?
Yeah, I think there's a good chance the Dodgers just let him be this year. We saw 11 regular season appearances last season. 10 of them were starts. So they basically used him as a starter until they got to the postseason, and then they got a little more creative with his role. But they trust him in high leverage opportunities. That was really apparent with the usage in the late innings throughout the playoffs. So I see a guy that could actually let everything come together. Mostly, I'm concerned about the strikeout rate right now, which is something I never thought I would say. But I don't look at the 8% walk rate from the shortened season and say, yeah, that's who he is now. He's going to be a slightly above average walk rate sort of guy. I think he's going to bring that number down because the command's actually good. The arsenal's deep. The Dodgers, of course, are loaded with pitching, so they can manage him carefully. But I think they're going to get to the point where they say, we want this guy to take the ball every fifth day for the next 4 or 5 years. So we have to let him just go. Otherwise, we're going to be managing him like this forever. I don't think that's ideal for them. I don't think they want to manage him like that. So really, for me, it's a strong ratios play. It's the belief that we're going to get more innings than usual, and the belief that we can at least get like a 25% K rate from Urias as a starter. I think he's going to be one of those really efficient starters who could be a top 15 guy at season's end if it all clicks, but safely inside the 25 to 30 range. You're not going to be burned if he only gets you 140 or 150 really good innings instead.
Once again, that is Derek VanRiper from The Athletic. You can find his full rankings at The Athletic, so make sure to subscribe and do that. Also, listen to the Rates and Barrels podcast, one of the best Tianinos are. So, Derek, thank you so much for taking the time, man.
Thanks, Garion. Really appreciate it.
And I want to remind you guys once again to leave a like on this video. Let us know in the comment section below who is your can't miss pitcher, the must grab pitcher for you in the 2021 season. And go over to prizepicks.com, the presenting sponsor of this show. Sign up with the promo code MMNMLB to get a $100 match bonus on your first deposit. That was Fantasy Baseball Picks and Bets. I'm Garion Thorne. I'll catch you guys next time.